Perfect. All right. So thank you so much, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Global Power Platform and Agent Bootcamp 2026. And this session agenda or the title is MCP Explained. We're going to touch base on what is MCP and how we can use it to connect with the AI agents, or I would say specifically focus on a Copilot Studio, and we'll deep dive into a few of the demo piece, where it connects, how it reacts, and so on. Okay, and there we go. So I go next. Yeah. So I'm Samir Makwana. I'm a Microsoft Valuable Microsoft MVP for Copilot Studio. I'm a solution architect. I help organization on different AI solution projects. This is the QR code for all my contact details. So feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions or want to talk more about or brainstorming any ideas. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Okay. So today's agenda. So we're gonna start with. Yeah, so we're going to start with understanding why MCP required or why MCP was created, right? And then we're going to touch base on what is MCP, what is MCP versus traditional APIs, how it is different, and why it is different and why MCP got created. We're going to touch base on MCP architecture, a deep dive, I would say, end-to-end flow where user call an agent, agent reach out to MCP, and MCP goes in back in and work on that flow and get back with the response. So we're going to touch base on the full conversation flow, like end-to-end. Then we're going to dive into the demo where I'm going to show you how MCP server, not with the 3 clients. One of the client is not working for me, which is Claude Desktop right now. But we're gonna connect same MCP servers to Copilot Studio and Visual Studio Code, and we'll try to access them. And I'll show you how we do it and what are the responses and how it is different than calling an API, right? Or calling the same API, which we are calling through MCP service. And then we're going to touch base on what are the different ways of building MCP servers. We're not going to building anything today. That could be a in-depth workshop. I have a GitHub. I'll share the link with you at the end of the session. You can connect to that GitHub and use the guide and try to build on your own as well. We'll go to how we can consume those MCP servers, comparisons between different ways, and at the end, we're going to wrap up with adoption and key takeaways. This is like a 45-minute session with one live demo. And the next. So how many of you, raise your hand if you can, how many of you have integrated Copilot Studio or any other agent you build with any API or calling an API? Talia, good. Okay. I see Sebastian. Okay. Cool. So when you integrate an API, let's say you have 10 API and you have 10 agents. Now you want that 10 API into each of the agents. Then you need to literally configure those 10 API either through code or through HTTP function calling. Either other way, you need to call those API individually. And whenever there's a change in that API on the API level, on the back end, you also need to make sure your agent where those connections are set up with HTTP or with the code or with the connection. those things might need to be updated. Depends on what changes you have made on your API in the backend. And that's why it's technically you're managing those connection or the code at the agent level. And that's why if there's a 10 agent with the 10 API in each, you are basically creating 100 integration. It's the same way if you have 10 AI agents and 100 API or the tools, then you are creating 1,000 custom integrations, right? However, so that was a problem, like, and this is where different team like Anthropic, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and other team like came together and they came up with a solution called modern context protocol. So in this protocol, what they're doing is whatever the code or the connection you are creating or managing to call the API, they move that piece back to the MCP server. And I'm going to elaborate more as we go further. But think of the scenario whenever there is an API change, your agent doesn't have to change anything else. It's still connecting the same MCP server, and server manage everything in the backend for you. So all the things, all the code change has to be done, not to done on the agent level, but on the MCP server level. And this is where I'm going to show you a quick diagrams in the next few slide to clear that concept. But meanwhile, think of an MCP is like a USB-C for AI. Instead of thinking about who's the manufacturer of the phone or who's the power adapter, which country it is, the cable, USB-C cable, continuously provide you same connectivity to that power, right? So let's go next. So little bit of background of model context protocol and what it is. So basically it's I would say bridge or intermediator which can say, okay, it doesn't matter what agent you are connecting to, which model you use on that agent, or doesn't matter which programming language you use for that agent, right? And at the same time, on the other side, doesn't matter which tool you use, which resource you use, or which prompt you use. As far as you are communicating on MCP or the specific protocol, you don't need to worry about compatibility because that server, MCP server itself going to help you manage that compatibility piece and will be a translator or a bridge, which makes sure whenever any agent calls the backend tools or APIs, they don't need to worry about what is the format or what language it has been built and so on. It will still be able to connect without any issue. So as you can see, I mentioned some of the fun facts here. It was basically introduced by Anthropic on November 25th on 2024, created by David and Justin. There are currently platinum members who are basically governance body of this MCP or Modern Context Protocol, which also includes Microsoft. And as I said before, the communication of that USB-C or consider MCP happens on a specific protocol and channel that is called JSON RPC 2.0. And that's a standard protocol which makes sure that any communication happen between AI and the tools, which could be resource, a data, or prompt, right? That can be done over JSON RPC, right? And we have some official SDK available for Python, TypeScript, C#, and Java, which you can use to build MCP servers and configure all the tools you need. very easily. If you want to use some existing MCP, then you can have the MCP registry. There are more than 2,000 or approximately 2,000 server entries available for you to review and use. It might require a security review for your enterprise, so please make sure before you use it in their production, make sure your company authorized or security approves those MCP server usage. Okay. And for transport, it uses different transport methods, or I would say communication channels. STDIO that is used when you're building Visual Studio, when you're building that server using Visual Studio's code, and you want to test it locally, or you want to test with Visual Studio Code with the locally built MCP server, nothing published on the internet. Okay, only for local testing. But when you want to build that MCP server and we want to publish it over the internet, for example, you might publish it in an Azure function, and then you want to test that MCP server is working fine or not, then you can use a streamable HTTP, either using MCP. There's a tool, MCP tester or configurator, which you can use. I'll show you the demo of that as well. You can use that, or you can use Copilot Studio, which use streamable HTTP to connect to your MCP server. Okay. All right. So how the traditional API integration versus MCP? Okay. So traditional API integration. As I said earlier, each of the API needs to be hard-coded and configured either through code or HTTP call or prompt within that agent. Whereas in MCP, you offload that configuration or that code to the MCP server. So agent will be more focused on that LLM, and the instruction, and the other agentic flows rather than how it's going to connect to those tools, those external tools, right? And that's where MCP can be helpful a lot. So traditional API integration, most of the time, either we write code by using different language, or we use HTTP connections to make API calls from the agent. Whereas MCP, once you have a connection between your agent and MCP server, don't need to worry about what tools to use, how to use and all, how to discover those tools, because the connection between agent and MCP server will help you discover those tools during the runtime and try to find a match and trigger those tools on the runtime. Okay, and we'll see that in a demo in a minute. Okay. In terms of maintenance-wide, traditional API integration is required very much, or high impact changes if you need to update every agent where that API is being used, versus MCP server, you just update that API on that MCP server, and all the agents which are connecting to that MCP server will be start working with the new changes. No changes required on the agent side, right? And security-wise, secrets managed at the agent level when you calling the API from the agent directly, whereas in MCP, it's stored within the MCP, or you can use a key vault and use those keys accordingly. And only thing which you need to use is authentication between agent and MCP server, which you can leverage Enter ID on most of the agent SDK or MCP SDK scenarios, right? So in a nutshell, MCP is not a replacement for APIs. API is gonna live there and gonna stay there. It's just I would say layered approach. Earlier, we used to call API directly from agents. Now, but that was more cumbersome and also required lots of update when there is a change in API. bringing MCP, it provides additional layer of management where we say, okay, all the APIs will be now wrapped up into MCP servers as a different tools, and agents only worry about connecting to one MCP, and that way it can call multiple tools within that MCP if needed. Okay. So this is the diagram where you can see. Okay, this is the diagram where you can see that legacy way when every agent needs to own their own code to call an API. So think of there are different user channels. There are two different agents. One is a Python-based agent where I wrote that agent in Python. Another is the agent I wrote it in a Node.js, right? Now, there is a client within that agent environment, and this portion called host, this portion called channels where agent is published. And now the host has a component called MCP client. And this is the portion which is responsible to let agent know within that agent host which API to call. Right now, you can see it's hard coded by Python code. So it's basically, it's not an MCP, and it's directly connected to both the API, like Holiday API and Shopify, the same way this agent as well. Now think of a scenario, if there is something needs to be changed in Holiday API or Shopify API, code on both the agent needs to be changed. Think about the same API being used by maybe 100 or 200 agents, then all those changes needs to be done on those multiple agents as well, right? So it's very important that you understand what is the underneath issue and why the MCP is required. And now we are transitioning to the next stage where we say, how that flow look like with MCP? So if you look at the code which was earlier used to live within that agent or the host, right, under the Copilot Studio, now it has moved under MCP server, like get holidays and check inventory, so that when any user reach out to agent asking for holiday details, it's basically knows where to go and check if there's any tool available to answer that. So basically it goes and say, okay, MCP client, talk to MCP server, find out if there's any tool available which can help me get the holidays, right? And this is nothing but an API call configured here at the MCP server level rather than MCP host or at the agent or the Copilot Studio level, right? And that is the API call made to the respective API and get the answer back to the user. And this is just a standard 3-step flow. You can see here what I explained to you just now, right? So in this case, now think of a scenario, Holiday API and Shopify API has to change. So instead of, now we have a 2 agent. So instead of making changes in both the agents for both the API, it means for total 4 changes. Instead of doing that, what we need to do here is we just need to go back and say, okay, change the get holidays tool under MCP server and check inventory tool under MCP server. As soon as we make those 2 changes, all the agents, not only these 2, if we have any more agents connecting to the same MCP server, will be getting that changes without any issue. So let's deep dive and understand a bit of this terminology of MCP, who's who, I would say. So user interface is nothing but consider a Teams and a web chat or the Slack where your agent is published. That MCP host is your Copilot Studio or the brain, or where you have your agent is hosted, your MCP client is pre-configured. You don't need to do anything about it. It comes with Copilot Studio itself. And AI agent is nothing but it's an agent which is live into that MCP host, which is a Copilot Studio in our case. And there's the MCP client SDK, as I said earlier, that is also part of MCP host, which helps MCP host or AI agent to communicate with MCP server. And there is an MCP server which is built either on on MCP SDK, or you can also build with the different languages, but that will be more advanced topic. But MCP server has different tools, which is basically configured to call different external APIs. In our case, we're going to call the holiday API, and then we're going to call money conversion or euro to Poland Zoltys conversion MCP server, and the tools we're going to talk, and we're going to look into the demo as well. So this is the end-to-end flow look like. I'm not sure if this is much of a visible to you. Let me know if I need to zoom. So as you can see here, users start a communication with the AI agent, asking about what is the next holiday in Japan or Poland or Canada or US. Agent basically posted in a Copilot Studio and has a MCP client and everything. So it has a connectivity to MCP server. So it's basically initiate that discovery to find out, do I have any tools which I can use to get that info? And it reach out to MCP server connection, find all the tools available to it, and it fetched the list of those tools. As you can see, it get the list of the tools. One of the tool name is get upcoming holidays. And then after it gets the access token, once that authorized, it initiate a connection back to that MCP server. An MCP server have its own configuration with the backend tool, which is nothing but a public holiday API with all the client secret keys and all. But also, it's also going to pass which country this user have asked holiday for. So as you can see, we are calling a get function here to call that API with the country code and the year, so that tool or API can work on that query and return the answer in a JSON format. Once it is returned in a JSON format, it goes back to MCP server. It update the details in a different format, and that pass along to the AI agent where we have our LLM or ChatGPT or whatever model you have configured within your agent. And that's make that response from MCP server more appropriate and send it back to the user. So this is the high level flow looks like. And this is the fundamental, I would say, overview of how MCP works. However, think of a scenario if you're calling this API directly without having this middle piece in between, then what's going to happen whenever you make changes in API, as I said before, you need to make sure this portion, what you have here, calling the API or the tool in a different ways, also needs to be updated at the agent level and every agent level, not only at one MCP server, right? And that is the painful process. So how the and so MCP works on a client server mechanism. Client lives into MCP host, or consider a Copilot Studio, or where your agent is hosted or stored, basically. So that has a client, and MCP server act as a server where it listen to all the requests and process them accordingly with the different tools it has, right? But that communication between client and server happen on different transport layer or channels. Underneath, doesn't matter which transport layer or channel it use the same JSON-RPC 2.0 to make sure that results are delivered consistently. So for example, if you use stdio, it's recommended to use only for local server. And so basically, if you have a Visual Studio Code, you're building an agent, an MCP server, and before you make it live or hosting on any of the public environment and make it available for public testing, you want to test locally, this is where you use stdio. If you want to publish your agent, publish your MCP or deploy your MCP server, let's say in Azure Function as a runtime, then after you publish that, if you want to test this, you need to have using streamable HTTP. That's where you can use those cloud hosted servers, Azure Functions, or you can use Copilot Studio because this is what is required for Copilot Studio. Now, SSE, that's a deprecated method, so I wouldn't talk about it. But if you think of using it, make sure you don't, because it has been deprecated since like mid of 2025 and out of support since August 2025. Right? So in a nutshell, for the local machine, best for development, you install Visual Studio Code, install all the prerequisites, and then after you want to test this, then use stdio for Claude or any local desktop app you have. If you want to go and test it in public, this is where you should go. Azure Function, try with Azure Function, deployed in Azure Function with the Visual Studio Code. Once you deployed, go ahead and test it and see how it looks. It inbuilds with the Microsoft Entra ID, security and authentication. So if you want to store those keys somewhere else, like in a vault, you can do that. So now it's time to demo. And in this demo, I'm going to show you MCP server configured in Copilot Studio and MCP server configured, or rather than configure, I would say MCP server already configured and pre-built by me, and it's hosted in Azure Function. Now I'm going to use Copilot Studio to connect to that, as well as I'm going to show you how I'm connecting I'm using Visual Studio to connect to that. And we're going to run a query to get certain answers and see how it reacts. Okay. There we go. All right. Okay, so I have one demo agent here. In that this demo agent is created under Copilot Studio. It's very basic. Nothing is fancy configured. Nothing in the knowledge. Nothing in instruction. Anywhere. However, the goal of this agent to connect to different tools and get the answer for the request user do for that. So for example, one of the requests we're going to do for this holiday MCP server is to find out what is the next upcoming holiday in Poland. And also we're going to try converting euros to zloty and zlotys to euro and see how it looks. And we will see the behavior of this MCP into the test pan as well. Okay. So let me start testing from the scratch. So I say, can you tell me next holiday in Poland? Now, as you can see, it has started reaching out and initializing all the MCP we have configured as a tool in this agent. And then after it has found one of the matching MCP, and within that MCP, it has found, so for example, this holiday MCP has 3 tools within it as it has initialized. The first one is get holidays by year. The another one is get upcoming holidays for that specific country and check if today is the holiday, right, on that specific country. However, as we were looking for specific upcoming holiday in Poland, it has choose the second tool. And as you can see that tool here being called out, and it has passed because we use this word as a Poland here. So what it does is it goes to the LLM, whatever the model we have used in this agent. That model translates that Poland into the country code because it knows these MCP servers require a country code rather than the full country as a word, right? So it has converted that into a PL, and then it has passed it to that MCP tool. And this is the output it got in a JSON format. Now, as you can see, it has responded everything or every upcoming holidays for Poland. But that's what MCP server do, right? Because that's the API call, and API call respond back with all the data it's supposed to return. There is no filter on that. But when it comes to the LLM or the agent model, once it gets the response from MCP server, it has looked at what was the original question or the context user has asked for in user prompt. Then we find, okay, we asked for only for first holiday in the upcoming month. Then it says here, I don't know, you guys can confirm if this is true or not, but upcoming holiday in Poland is Easter Sunday, which falls on April the 5th. This is followed by Easter Monday, the April the 6th. If this is the true, then please say thumbs up on your screen so that I know it worked well. Anyone knows upcoming holiday by heart, or do the Google just to validate my agent or MCP results? All right, I'll consider silence as a yes. Let's move on. So this was the first MCP we called. The second one is, as I'm gonna come to Poland again for Nordic Summit this year, I want to carry some euros or some zlotys, but I don't know how that conversion works, right? So just for a test purpose, I want to see how that conversion works. It might not be the accurate because I haven't used any public API to, I would say, to calculate the conversion between euros and zlotys, but this is just to see how it works, the tool itself, okay? So help me convert 1,000 zlotys in euro. I know I did a typo. Let's see if it understands. Now, as you can see here, it has called the next MCP server connection, which is currency converter. So if I go back when it was initialized, you can see in this currency converter MCP server, we have 2 tools, one to convert zlotys zloty into euro, and another is converting euro into zloty, right? And we are using that tool here where we're saying convert it, and it is returning the values like this. Okay, but this is not the right number. I know for sure, but just to understand and see how it looks. Okay. Now the same thing we can do by calling that or calling the same MCP server. As you can see, I have called the same MCP server URL using HTTP method, and it's running right now. I'm just gonna restart this so that we can have a chat on in here. And yeah, as you can see, as soon as I have restarted the server, it has discovered 3 tools, which is a good sign. And now I'm gonna restart the window, the new chat. And I'm gonna come back here at the bottom. As you can see, there are different options and different tools. We can go back here. We can choose our MCP server, and we can choose one of the tools here directly. Also, this is Visual Studio Code acting as an agent or the model. We can choose which model to use in that agent, like we do in a Copilot Studio as well. But let's say I want to just start chatting with this MCP server and see what it looks like by chatting this by chatting with this agent, because this chat is set as an agent rather than the task. So I'm just going to put it here, say, tell me upcoming holiday in USA, Canada. And let's see what it does. So hopefully it will respond. Okay, you can see that it's running get upcoming holidays. And it says my MCP server upcoming holidays all are this. And the first one is St. Patrick Day, but is on Newfoundland, Labrador only. Good Friday is the nationwide holiday. Give me next holiday, or let me put it this way, nationwide holiday of Canada. And let's see if it gives the full list or it just gives the Good Friday, right? As you can see, the next nationwide holiday in Canada, it's Good Friday on April the 3rd, 2026, observed across the province and territories, right? The same. So what I'm trying to show you is we have agents in Visual Studio Code. We have agents in Copilot Studio. We might have agent in Claude, or maybe in Azure AI Foundry. We don't know. Or maybe we have 10 agents within Copilot Studio itself, right? And each of them require, let's say, same API to connect with. So rather than connecting and configuring those API, building an MCP server and publish it or deploy it in Azure function and make it available to those agents is more appropriate, I would say long run, because if you need to update those API in the future, you don't need to worry about updating them into those agents. You just update it into your MCP server, and that should be it. I think we have only 5 minutes left, so let me just quickly run through the PPT, and we'll open the floor for questions if you have anything. Okay, so what type of MCP service we have? So one of the local, the one which I showed you, the Visual Studio Code, we can run locally. The remote servers are the ones which we hosted on the cloud environments like Azure Function or Cloudflare. flare workers, right? Pre-built and community MCPs are mostly the ready-to-use MCP servers available, like a GitHub or Microsoft 365, or anything which is available. I think there are more than 2,000 community MCP servers you can look at. Agent 365, I would definitely suggest you to try in your labs. It's a Microsoft built MCP server for Microsoft 365 services to manage or to interact with Outlook Calendar, Teams, Word, Dataverse, and Copilot Search, and many more. Okay. Now, building an MCP, there are two different ways. You do with SDK or without SDK. When you do with the SDK, it's SDK handles all the majority of the work for you, and it makes your life easy. Like, you just choose which agent like SDK, MCP SDK you want to use. Like, it could be TypeScript, it could be Python, C# or Java. Either of those four, you pick up one of them, and it will handle all the JSON RPC formatting for you, connection lifecycle, error handling, and everything. You only write the tool name, input schema, and then call those functions through API. Yeah. Whereas when you start without SDK, because if you want to use any other language like PHP, Ruby, Go, Rust, or Extra, then you need to make sure you build every component of that MCP to make sure you build handshake, how the client and the server are going to do the communication, handshake, and message parsing and transport handling. And I would say it's literally advanced, and I hardly see a use case right now for you to try that scenario. However, if you come across, don't hesitate to try. Definitely, there is a way to do it. Okay. So, what are the ways to build MCP servers? So, as I said before, there are different SDKs available for you to use that aligns to different languages. And it all goes back to different efforts, how much effort you need to put into it, right? And what are the best possible scenarios you can align with those approaches, right? The best one is pre-built. If you have if you see a pre-built MCP available to use, go through your security review and make sure you have that available to you. But if you want to build something quick and new for your internal APIs, then you can use Python SDK or TypeScript. I recommend either of them, and that will help you build your MCP quicker. Ways to use it. So once you build it, you need to make sure how you're going to consume or use that MCP server, how you're going to connect to the agent, and how you're going to leverage those backend tools or knowledge or prompts, right? And that's where you can use different things like Copilot Studio, Claude, Desktop, Visual Studio Code. You can build your own agent, and you can connect that with the MCP server and move further, right? So there is a wide variety of the scenarios and types here. And I'll share this PPT with you, basically with the organizers of this event, so that can be available to you if you want to deep dive into each of these topics. But just to give you a quick peek into how you add that MCP server into the Copilot Studio agent as a tool, this is the way to do it. You just click on the add tool here, go to model context protocol, add model context protocol server. You give the name, this server name is just a name, give the name to make sure you understand what that tool is. So basically this is going to be a name of the tool which will be visible in your list here, right? This is nothing to match with your MCP server. The same way, description, make sure you provide appropriate description so that agent knows that this tool is meant for what. And then this is the server URL. So once you build your MCP server, you publish into the Azure because it should be accessible by over the internet. Then in that Azure function, you will see different URLs, and one of the URL which we need to look for is endport URL. You need to have that URL, copied it over here. And then for the authentication, we use API key, or you can go with OAuth as well if you need to. Let's say if you're using API key, then this is the X function key you need to call. And the next one you need to do is connect, new connection. And over here, you need to enter that key. Remember, this is just a header or the name of the key. And this is the place where you really enter that key, which you copied from Azure function. Now, let's say if I need to connect the same Azure function with Cloud, then Cloud has a desktop application. You go to the settings here, then you go to developer option, and then you go into the edit config. And under that, it will open up a Windows Explorer, where it will show you one JSON file called cloud_desktop_config.json. You open that file, delete all existing content out of it if you haven't configured previously. And you copy paste this specific text into it. Make sure you have your MCP server name correctly mentioned. The URL with your appropriate function name is mentioned, and the key which you have generated within your Azure function. Okay. And don't forget to replace these keys and everything. Don't just simply copy paste this text because it will not work in that way. Okay. So what MCP is there, if we can call an API directly as well, then what's going to happen with the connectors? It's going to remain there because they are made for different use cases, each of them, right? And I would say they're going to go along, get together, rather than one overshadowing other. So Power Platform having more than 1,400 connectors in a Power Platform catalog. It has a different purpose versus MCP in Copilot Studio. When you build any MCP and deploy in Azure function, you can call that in a Copilot Studio. That has a different purpose altogether, right? So how to plan an adoption of MCP or MCP server or the MCP as a whole, right? I would say zero code. Start today, browse Copilot Studio, use a pre-built MCP catalog. So the one I would like to quickly show you are these guys: email management MCP server, contact management, Microsoft Dataverse MCP server. Try exploring them and see what it can provide you. So for example, this email management will allow you to send, receive, reply, read or list email or forward email, all those functions, right? For that specific account. So try exploring those existing MCP server rather than building something new and see how that helps. Whereas on the second phase, once you are comfortable with using pre-built MCP servers, go level 2. And that's where you start with low code. Pick an SDK, be it Python or TypeScript or C# or Java, whatever the language you're comfortable with. Identify one of your internal API and wrap it to make it an MCP server, a tool within MCP server. And once you have that, test it locally and then deploy it in Azure function. And once you do that, you just need to make sure you connect that Azure function or MCP server hosted in Azure function into your tools under Copilot Studio. And if you want to go the next level, make sure you register all those server under Azure API Center. Also work on more about how we gonna do authentication, how you're gonna secure all the uh, uh, MCP servers. I have a very good guide. I'm gonna put a link in a chat window as well, and I'll share the PPT as I said. It has a resource which talks about there is an entity called OWASP, which builds a guidance around how to secure your MCP server. It's very good guide. I would highly recommend that if you are planning to use or build any MCP, then please go through that and make sure you are aligning with those standards for securing your MCP. Basically, you need to make sure your whatever MCP you're going to use, the authentication method are secure, has a clear tool descriptions, and also it supports streamable HTTP, and someone is responsible to maintain them. Okay. So these are the common use cases I see where MCP can add value. As I said before, MCP, Microsoft 365 automations, agents schedule meetings, send emails, create documents, and so on and so forth. Same way, there are others use cases as well, right? So this is the, I think, last slide before we wrap up or open for a question and answer. So what are the key takeaways? MCP is an open standard introduced by Anthropic. However, now it's being managed as a foundation by a group of entities like Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, AWS, and so on, where MCP solves the problem. So when I started looking into it, I thought, why use MCP when I can call API directly? And that's where I deep dive, I make it more clear in a layman language to see why having MCP as a middleman rather than calling those API directly. Because I don't want to go huddle with all those agents being impacted when I'm someone changing the API. And that API, I need to change on all those 10 or 50 or 100 agents if they are being leveraged by those agents, right? And that's where MCP provides that middle layer. Um, and that layer is really helpful to standardize and streamline those change management processes as well. So there's a host. Host is nothing but where your agent is hosted, AI agents, like let's say Copilot Studio. Client is a part of that host already. So Visual Studio Code also has that client for MCP. Copilot Studio has inbuilt MCP client. And what the client do is it's a communicate the things which required host to communicate with the MCP server. And MCP server is has a list of tools or data sources, which could be API, it could be resources or database, or it could be prompts as well. And as I said before, two ways to build as agents, sorry, MCP servers, one with SDK and without SDK as well. And yeah, I would only recommend start today, consume a catalog server like Zero Code, go and see if any MCP, I would say specifically that Microsoft 365 MCP is way to go. So try using that before you build something custom or plan for enterprise governance, okay? These are the resources, very good resources. I would highly recommend for you to go through it. One of them is my GitHub repo, but there are many much more advanced repo available for you to play with as well. So these are the list of repo you can look for. Okay, any questions for me?
I'm just checking the Q&A section. We don't have anything new. Okay. No. There is no question whatsoever right now, but that was really awesome overview. Thank you very much, Samir. It was well done. I saw at least one comment about that. So it is just awesome. And I guess the end of the story is that we should start to use it as fast as we can, especially to govern the stuff in the correct way and to avoid multiplication of the same activities too many times.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Right. And guys, this is the QR code for providing a feedback to my session. So please let me know how I did, and how you like it, or fill the survey and let me know so that I can work on the things further.
Awesome.
Once you're done with that, I'll move to the next one. Okay, so please fill out the survey and win a ticket for European Power Platform Conference in Copenhagen in 29 June to 2nd July. Or you can use a code GPPB Baltic to get €150 off your ticket. And
Yes.
just to let you know, I'm presenting 2 of the sessions there. So if you are there coming EPPC this year, ping me on a LinkedIn. I'll happy to connect with you while we are there.
Awesome.
Okay.
Just awesome.
And yeah, one more thing. There's Amazon gift card as well as different swags available. I don't know, David, this is one of the swag or not. But
yeah, this is like from the Global Platform Bootcamp global part. So
okay.
yeah, this one is from them.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So fill the survey here too. I found very interesting because there are 3 different, like 2 major giveaways. Like one is the EPPC and the other one is this. So yeah, this is great, guys.
Yeah, indeed.
And at the end, I would like to thank all the sponsors, because without them, this is not possible. And thank you so much to you, all of you, for joining this session, and I'll be happy to connect with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. So I guess if you have a moment or two to stay in the chat, and if something will drop off, definitely we can connect either through the LinkedIn or any other social type media of platforms. And for the person who will win the EPPC ticket, you should connect with Samir in person.
Great session, Samir. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.